In the more than 200 years that locomotives have existed, countless unusual and outright bizarre machines have been created in an effort to solve all manner of problems. Maybe the railways they serve are on an exceptionally steep grade. Maybe they're experimenting with a newfound fuel source. Or maybe they're simply trying to solve the age-old problem of moving goods from point A to point B while using as little resources as humanly possible. Today, we'll be taking a quick trek around the globe, checking out just a handful of the strangest locomotives people have conjured up over the years. A few have unfortunately been lost to time, but many are still alive and well to this day. How about we start off with a locomotive that's not only a functional museum piece, but is also a national treasure. This is Eastern India Railway's number 22, better known as the Fairy Queen, and it's one of the oldest operating steam trains in the world. Built in 1855, this engine is older than light bulbs, dynamite, and the Queen of England. Speaking of England, that's actually where number 22 was made, and following its completion, it was transported almost 5,000 miles by boat to West Bengal. Upon arrival, this engine was put to work hauling mail trains and later troop trains during the Indian Rebellion in 1857. But after that, nothing too spectacular happened with 22. Like any old locomotive, it changed duties various times during its life. All my sources tell me the Fairy Queen's last assignment was simply construction, or line construction, so I assume that means maintenance away, but I could be wrong. Regardless, in 1909, number 22 was finally retired after more than 50 years of service, and for 6 long decades, it sat as a static display piece outside of Howrah Station before being moved to the Railway Zonal Training School in Uttar Pradesh, where it served as an object of curiosity for many students. Come 1972, the engine was given heritage status by the Indian government, turning it into a national treasure. Due to its elevated status, it was taken from its unprotected display site and moved to India's National Railway Museum in New Delhi. It wouldn't be until 1996 that the museum decided to overhaul number 22, restoring it to operational status. And on July 18th of the following year, the Fairy Queen pulled a special excursion train from New Delhi to Alwar as the oldest operational locomotive in the world. Funnily enough, number 22's claim as the oldest functional locomotive is now disputed, as its sister engine, EIR number 21, which was also built in 1855, was restored to operational status in 2010. Many say 21 is the older of the two by a few months, and they're probably right, but it's ultimately the Fairy Queen that holds the official record. Plus, it's got a much more interesting and well-known story. Anyways, the excursion train the Fairy Queen pulled took 2 days, because its max speed is only 25 miles an hour. For the next few years, nothing too interesting happened with the old gal until 2011, when a group of thieves broke into the Railway Museum and stole just about every removable part, many of which were irreplaceable. This prompted the museum to give 22 an unscheduled rebuild at the Perambur locomotive shops on the other side of the country. Many of the 50 or so missing parts had to be made from scratch, but through the efforts of many mechanics, machinists, and metal workers, the Fairy Queen was returned to service in the final days of 2012. And to make things even better, this engine still pulls occasional excursion trains 168 years after its creation, alongside number 21. Here in the United States, we rail fans are quite familiar with the 3 Conrail Heritage units produced by CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Metro North, along with the few remaining locomotives in original paint scattered across the country. However, what if I told you there's a 4th Big Blue Heritage unit more than 3,500 miles away from any former Conrail tracks? It's FCCA number 1030, an ex-Norfolk Southern C39-8, painted as a tribute to James Hagen, who was one of Conrail's last CEOs in the mid to late 90s. But why in the world is a small Peruvian railroad paying homage to this seemingly random guy? Well, he donated his railroading and business expertise to this struggling company. Unfortunately, there don't seem to be any articles describing exactly what knowledge Hagen gave to the Andes Central Railroad. However, we can infer, because we do know that at this time, the company was facing widespread disrepair as a result of government corruption, and it was also in financial ruin. Due to all these issues, the Peruvian government decided to privatize the Andes Central Railroad in 1999. After this, the line was bought by several private companies and investors under a 30-year operating agreement. I think it's pretty safe to assume that a struggling, newly privatized railroad, which had multiple entities working to operate it at once, was a complete cluster. So in order to keep this vital company afloat, FCCA executives called upon someone who had loads of experience running one of the best railroads in the Western Hemisphere. Hagen likely donated financial and business management information, as well as some tips and tricks on efficiently running trains. So as a thank you, the Andes Central Railroad painted a locomotive as a tribute to Conrail, and even adopted a version of their logo, which can still be found on FCCA locomotives today. Moving away from the high, arid peaks of the Andes, how about we head north to the Emerald Isle, which was once home to one of the strangest steam locomotives you could imagine. Meet Pat, a home-built switcher engine that served a coal gantry in Cork. Pat was made purely out of spare and scrap parts way back in 1905. The whole locomotive is built on top of a tender frame. Its two cylinders were taken from a scrap tank engine, and the cab was made with whatever materials the gantry workers could find. Amazingly, this little makeshift engine had a service life of more than 50 years, with its last assignment being in 1963. And it was the last steam locomotive CIE ever operated. As far as I'm concerned, the only reason it was taken out of service was simply because diesel became mainstream. After Pat was furloughed, he was unfortunately scrapped several years later. However, it's remarkable that a little homemade Frankenstein was able to outlast some of the most well-built and robust engines at the time. Another very unique steam locomotive is Union Pacific's world-renowned Big Boy number 4014. If you're a model train enthusiast or just a hardcore rail fan, then I'm sure you've seen this brick-built version of Big Boy at some point or another. And if you've ever wanted it for yourself, then you're in luck. The nice people over at EngineDIYShop.com have provided a 10% discount when you use the coupon code SPR with your purchase of this brick-built model. Just like the real 4014, this thing is nothing short of impressive. It's at 1/40th scale, making it nearly 3 feet long. The build and brick quality is fantastic, with many small details accounted for. Its highly articulated wheel sets means it can be used on any 6-stud wide track. And to top it all off, it's even remote control capable. So please, head on over to Engine DIY Shop by clicking the provided link in the description and use the coupon code SPR to get 10% off your purchase of Big Boy 4014. Back on the topic of wacky switcher engines, how about we take a look at Canadian National number 77, an early switcher made in 1929 that has the distinction of being Canadian National's first diesel-electric locomotive. But why does this thing look so strange? Well, this is just how things were done back then. Before SWs, SCs, and streamliners, just about every locomotive that wasn't a steam engine or self-propelled railcar was built either with a box cab, steeple cab, or highly customized car body tailored to its respective railroad's needs. However, CLC, the manufacturer of 77, decided to take a bold, radical, and all too profound step in the world of locomotives by prioritizing the visibility of the crew, which is why the car body has these stair-stepped cutouts. And as for all those extra doors and windows on the long hood, those are simply for accessibility and visibility when doing maintenance. This crazy switcher ended up having a pretty good service life. It worked for almost 40 years, first as a general switcher for Canadian National, then as a reserve locomotive for the Thousand Islands Railway, and finally as a plant switcher at the Canada Starch Factory. 4 decades and tens of thousands of rail cars later, 77 was taken out of service in 1968 due to old age, and was donated to the Canadian Railway Museum that same year, where it still resides today. Incredibly, the only thing that's changed about this locomotive in 94 years is its engine, which was swapped out for a Cat V12 sometime in the 50s.
Скатертью, скатертью дальний путь стелится и упирается прямо в небосклон. Каждому, каждому в лучшее верится. Катится, катится голубой вагон.
The Soviet Union is known for producing some otherworldly and unwieldy locomotives, such as the AA-20 and the P-38. However, there's likely never been a more convoluted design than the TP-1, a cab-forward 210-2 opposed piston diesel steam hybrid. There were 3 prototypes made at the Voroshilovgrad locomotive shops in Ukraine, and each one worked differently. However, the second one was definitely the most interesting. It had 8 pistons crammed into 4 cylinders. Half of them were powered by steam, and the other half were powered by coal gas in lieu of diesel. Now, the opposed piston design surprisingly wasn't the downfall of this locomotive, as these kinds of engines are actually quite efficient and well balanced. The problems lay in the coal gas, as well as the sheer amount of mechanical gymnastics it took to get power to the wheels. The locomotive could only operate stably in steam engine mode, as the coal gas would combust prematurely if it was continually used at speeds higher than 15 to 20 miles an hour. Pre-combustion in an engine is disastrous. It'll destroy pistons and bend connecting rods, as the fuel is igniting and expanding while the piston is still traveling upwards on the compression stroke. Also, all the extra linkages required to transmit power to the wheels, as well as the dual cab design, not only greatly increased the complexity of the engine, but also increased its weight, so these things didn't ride too smooth. By the early 40s, all this engine's issues were reportedly sorted out, and this wild contraption was shaping up to be a success. But as the conflicts of World War II found their way behind Soviet borders, the project was canceled, and to my knowledge, none of the 3 prototypes survive today. Thanks for watching. If y'all enjoyed this video, consider checking out some other ones of mine. Also, maybe pass yourself by the merch shop. Anyways, till next time.